the program and the impact on FDI. So whenever you're ready.
So thank you, colleagues. Yeah, I will introduce myself again, if you don't mind. My name is Gregory Kalachyhin. I am a research assistant at Center for Comprehensive European and International Studies at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, and my co-author is Elena Kotyrlo, PhD. She's assistant professor at the Department of Applied Economics, also in High School of Economics. So first of all, I would like to thank Professor Sen and Professor Kaka for inviting us to present our study related to Indian bilateral investment treaties. So in general, I will present our study, and Professor Kotyrlo will participate, as I understand, in Q&A session if needed. And of course, we're looking forward for fruitful discussion, and thanks again for inviting us. So the topic which we will discuss today is the effects of India's bilateral investment treaties termination on inward FDI flows or on FDI inflows. So let's begin. And here's the plan. It's not a lot of points, but let me just describe, say a few words about everyone, every of them. So the first is introduction. We will say a few words about what is bilateral investment treaties, when India started to sign them and enact them, what are the features of this text, and so on and so forth. Then we will move to reasons and some kind of peculiarities of BAT mass termination in India. What was the reason? What was, I would say, some kind of watershed moment in it, and yeah. So then we will move to some kind of literature review. It will be about what studies already exist. They also answer the question whether BATs influence the FDI flows from between the countries, and also they try to answer the question why countries enact these agreements. So then we will look into the methods and what methods which are used usually to assess effects of BATs. We will describe what the features of our study, and then we will move to the methods and actually the model. Of course, we will tell you about our data, about its sources. Maybe you will provide us with some kind of interesting pieces of advice where to take the data, maybe in other sources. And of course, we will, then it will be, I think, the most interesting part. It's estimation results, conclusions, and Q&A. So as I understand, some kind of questions could be during the presentation to clarify the point, but it's okay. Don't hesitate to interrupt me. So if everything is okay, if you hear me well, and if you see the slides well, still we can start. Professor Kaka, is everything okay?
Yes. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So let the show start. So bilateral investment treaties, if maybe some of you doesn't know, just I like to notice, it's agreements usually between two countries, because it's bilateral, yeah. But for example, in case of India, there was some kind of, not some kind of, but there was a BAT between India and Belux, Belgium and Luxembourg. So these agreements include rules to promote and protect two-way investment between these countries. So usually, of course, BATs vary across countries, but they generally share the similar features. They define foreign investment, they laying out various principles regarding treatment of this investment, transfer of funds, expropriation, And to my mind, one of the main points, one of the main provisions, chapters, is the mechanism for dispute settlement between investor and country, between country and country. So bids could be used to complement countries' institutional quality, and therefore they can be used to attract foreign investors and their investment. India concluded the first BAT in 1994. However, like those agreements which were signed since then, usually, not usually, but they presented a problem of incomplete contracts because there were lack of provisions and because of a few ambiguous provisions. So this was the reason why India had to renegotiate, to terminate and renegotiate these agreements. And in 2015, India developed a new BAT model and launched unilateral massive termination of these agreements in 2016 to consolidate these changes. The peak of the termination was in March 2017. So our study aims to identify the nature of the BITS termination effect and effect on FDI inflows to India. The central hypothesis is that BITS termination led to FDI inflows decrease. We use two methods to do that. It's difference in difference or double difference, the same method, and synthetic control method to study this phenomenon. The results show, like some kind of spoiler, the results show a significant negative effect on attracting FDI to India after the BITS termination. But estimates results do not indicate any effect of BITS termination for FDI from developing countries. So here you can see on the slides the picture of yearly statistics of signed and enacted BATs by India from 1994 and 2014. As you can see, since 1994, every year at least one bilateral investment treaty was signed until 2014. And of course, because of some kind of bureaucratic processes, agreements do not enter into force exactly after they signed. Actually, there are a few BATs which were signed by India with other countries, but not entered into force. So, to the middle of last decade, India developed quite extensive network of preferential agreements covering investments. Bilateral investment treaties were has a dominant share in this network. It was approximately 80 treaties, but we also can say about one another preferential agreement with investment provisions. It's regional trade agreements. Not of them are with investment provisions, but in Indian case there are 7 such FTAs. So of course, free trade agreements, regional trade agreements, they include not only they can be not only bilateral but plurilateral, but still the countries which has relations with India by bilateral investment treaties are quite, the number of these countries are quite bigger. So we can say that bilateral investment treaties were primary mechanism to establish a preferential relation for investment with other countries. So India employs the BIT model for the BITS conclusion. It's some kind of standard text. Deviation from it are quite infrequent. And as I already said, BITs were signed annually. At least one of the BIT was signed during 1994 to 2013. And actually, some experts, it was started as some kind of part of economic liberalization reforms, which were launched in 1991. And this type of annual signing of a lot of BATs, as experts said, it was quite usual for developing countries of that time. So because these countries formed many BITs among themselves without profound concerns about possible economic consequences, because the main purpose was to attract foreign investment and, of course, the investment and enhance economic growth. But as we understand, if the texts have drawbacks, it will have some consequences and repercussions. So as we talk about massive bits termination, as I said, it was started in 2016. It was announced in 2016 that this termination will start. So there were a few reasons for that. The first one is some kind of shortcomings of text. The model of 2003, from the 2003 was quite small. It was only 7 pages, and it lacks a lot of provisions which actually needed to be included to make the agreement, like to avoid the loopholes. So, and as a result, India faced numerous disputes with investors during 2003 and 2019. 25 claims were launched against India under the investor-state dispute settlement system, and 24 of them were based on the BITS provisions. So, and actually, as of the 1st of June of the previous year, 13 of them are still under review. So it's quite a problem, like a lot of disputes for India, like with investors. But actually, as I said, it was a quite watershed moment, and it was maybe the main reason, the general reason to initiate the revision of the BIT model. It was India's loss to Australian company White Industries Limited. So it was actually the first award which were known publicly, because usually it's a quite private issue. And when it became public, 17 companies noticed to India that they started a dispute, that India received 17 notifications from other companies. So, So BIT models revisions were necessary to eliminate previously identified shortcomings, to avoid further financial and reputational, it's more important, reputational costs, and achieve a quite new balance in the state-investor relationships. As a consequences, we have a new BIT model in 2015, and India used two approaches to adjust its network of bits. Here on the slide, you can see a graphical, let's say it's graphical interpretation of the bilateral investment treaties signed, terminated, revised, or resigned by India, like its information as of the 1st of June 2020. So, as I said, India used...
I just have one quick question.
Yep.
Do you know how long were these treaties supposed to run for? Were they supposed to run for many years, or 1 or 2 years?
You mean the duration of these agreements? Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, the duration is, as I remember, it's 10 years. But it can be like it prolonged automatically if parties or if countries are not decided to terminate it. Okay. So as for model, it's, as I remember, it's 10 years, but actually it can in practice it can change country by country. But the main thing that it prolonged automatically. And one more thing, maybe to understand why we it's another feature of the bilateral investment treaties, like at least for India, that even if bilateral investment treaties are terminated, I mean, for example, India with Ukraine, yeah, or Russia terminated the bilateral investment treaty, the provisions, the obligations are continue to be enforced for investments that already made before the termination for at least 10 years more. So I mean that the investment that were made in India before the termination are protected by this agreement 10 years more after it was terminated.
Okay.
So it's I think it's another important detail you need to know.
All right, thanks.
So, I'm sorry. As I said, the new BIT model came into force in 2015. And India used to, like, this model is quite bigger. It's 29 pages with 24 articles. As I already said, the previous model was about 7 pages. It was quite short. And India initiated a massive unilateral termination in 2016, and it had two approaches. The first one is they asked 58 countries to review the agreement based on a new BIT model, and accordingly they terminated the existing BITs. Another approach was that 25 countries were asked to form some kind of joint interpretive statements of the BITs provisions, like just to clarify those ambiguous provisions without terminating the BITs itself. So, and yeah, actually we didn't find public information about which countries were included in both groups. But according to the Ministry of Finance of India, there were signed only 2 joint interpretive statements. It's with India and Colombia, and with Colombia and Bangladesh. It's quite interesting, and it was nothing that BIT between India and Colombia was signed in 2009, but actually it has never entered into force. So I really, in some way, don't understand why they do that joint interpretive statements if the agreement is not enacted. In other negotiations, we know that India have negotiations on joint interpretive statements with United Arab Emirates. So, but no more information about that. So we can conclude that BITs with other 22 countries will be already terminated or will be terminated soon. Yep. So, and like before we move to the literature review and other points of our study, I would like to present you a small table. Here you can see a top 5 foreign direct investment sources, I mean countries which invest to India in financial years from 2015, 2016 to the 2018, 2019. So, as you can see, 2/3 of this investment, I mean, during this period, are from 2 countries. It's Singapore and Mauritius. We know that both of these countries are offshore territories, but the first one, the Singapore, has never had a BIT with India, and the second had the BIT, and it was termination actually in March 2017. I would like to ask you to keep in mind this information. It will be needed to understand the reasons why we made some of our hypotheses. Yep. So now we move to the literature review, and of course there have been a lot of studies and estimations of BIT's impact on foreign direct investments, and actually, they do not have the same answer on the question, for example, do BITs affect FDI inflows? So, for instance, in particular, Holbert-Dromaya, looking at investment from 20 OECD countries in 31 developing countries, the period was 1980-2000, it was 20 years. She concluded that bilateral investment treaties do not attract FDI to countries. The same result got the Rose Ackerman and his co-authors. So we have some kind of examples of studies which tell us that BITs do not affect FDI flows, but the majority of studies found that BITs are positively impact on FDI flows. For instance, Butha and Milner, evaluating BITs effectiveness in 121 developing countries between 1970 and 2000, they found a significant relationship between the number of concluded BITs and actually growth of FDI inflows. At the same time, Benga in 2000, in his article of 2003, found that countries that bilateral investment treaties with developed countries only affect the FDI, while these agreements with developing countries do not affect significantly the foreign direct inflows to the countries. Of course, there are much more recent studies. For example, Cox and Rojas Romagosa, they studied the impact of various preferential trade agreements, preferential agreements on FDIs, and they, one of the types was bilateral investment treaties, and they conclude it has a quite significant impact on foreign direct inflows. Another questions which pundits usually, or scientists usually trying to answer in their studies is, are there any other reasons for countries to sign a BIT? So we can emphasize a few of them. So the first one is countries may do that, sign and enact bilateral investment treaties to signalize that countries are ready to liberalize economic policies and reduce risks for potential investors. I would say that maybe it was one of the main reasons of India, because as I already said, it was a part of liberalization economic reforms. I mean, start of signing the BITs. So it's quite good reason. So another one, it's to enhance institutional quality of the country, and another one, it can be countries may do that to hedge the risk if the country has some kind of unstable political situation.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Hi. Suppose one country doesn't have a BIT with India. So can it route its FDI through, let's say, Mauritius and Singapore, and get the benefit of the treaty that Mauritius and India have, or Singapore and India have? So are these BITs controlling? I mean, are these FDI flows only between two countries that sign these agreements, or are they also looking at other countries who don't have BITs but are routing their FDIs through countries that have agreements?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I would say that, as I know, that it's who invest, who made the foreign direct investment. Companies do that. So if company is registered in Mauritius or Singapore, it's okay for them to invest in India. I mean, where the source of Mauritius is a quite small island. So you understand that a lot of these companies, and of course it's offshore territory, a lot of these countries actually, a lot of capital come from other countries. And actually it might be like in Russian version, like, for example, if we compare to Russia, yes, that a lot of investment, foreign direct investment to Russia come from Cyprus. Cyprus is another offshore territory, and we know that a lot of Russian companies, I mean, Russian oligarchs, Russian businessmen, whatever you call them, they have firms registered in Cyprus, and they move the capital through the Cyprus to avoid, like, no, maybe not to avoid, but to get less taxes. So it's okay for example, I would say for American company to register in Mauritius and then to invest through the Mauritius to India or through the Singapore. But Singapore actually has, as I already said, has never had bilateral investment treaty with India. Yep, I answered your question. I'm sorry, chat, missed it.
Yeah. I was just curious whether you had some numbers on that, but that's okay. Maybe you'll.
No, it's quite. It's you mean how much of investments go from Mauritius are not from Mauritius? You mean that?
Yeah. So I think as a country who wants to send FDI to India, you can set up shell companies. There are all kinds, as you're saying, all kinds of ways to do it.
Yeah, but like the numbers, we cannot say your numbers because actually it's quite private information. It's not public. So yeah, so we use quite aggregate data from the Indian sources.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So if there is no any questions more, where I stopped? Can you remind me? I told about the hedging of the risks, yeah, and actually we can move to the next slide. Yep. So, and as I said, a lot of studies were implemented regarding effects of bilateral investment treaties. Here you can say few of them, and actually the model specifications of these studies, as we can see, a lot of, maybe not a lot, but a few methods are used, and actually difference in difference, the methods we use are only in one study. It's Falvey and Foster McGregor in 2018. But we do it too, and we think it's quite effective to assess, to evaluate the impact of bilateral investment treaties for foreign direct investment. Yep. So let's move on. So our also the issue of BEAT's impact on FDI flows is in the focus in many studies. Many of them look at countries without focusing on a particular one. They use some kind of aggregate number of countries. It's quite effective, but the fact is that we found only one study. It was Hassan and Banochi in 2016, who focused on India's BEAT's impact on FDI between 2001 and 2012. So, but actually they consider the period which includes the BEAT's. They try to evaluate the impact of BEATS, but that period was only with, I'm sorry, this period consists of only 2 countries signed the BEATS with India at that time. Let's do that. So not all countries. So our study quite have a few features. The first one, that in contrast to previous studies, which usually focused on, they can be focused on 2 different things. First one is how the number of enacted BATs influence the FDI, or how the signing or entering into force of some kind of BEATs affect the foreign direct investment. We do, like, from other side, we evaluate the impact of the termination. So we look at it from the termination side. Second, we use a broader list of countries that invest in India. How many, I will tell a bit later. The third one, we include the countries with which the BEATs were terminated and countries without bids at all. I mean, without bids with India. And it makes possible to evaluate the termination effect and eliminate macro shocks affecting both groups. So we use DD, or like difference in difference, to eliminate macro shocks affecting all countries. And of course, another feature, we use quarterly data to highlight the termination effect more accurately, because bilateral investment treaties were not terminated at the start of calendar years. Like the most of them was terminated in the final days of the first quarter of 2017. So here are our 5 hypotheses. So the central hypothesis is the first one. H1 is that the bids termination led to a decrease in attracted FDI to India, or to a decrease of FDI inflows to India. The second one is based on one of the findings of Banga in 2003, which I already mentioned, that effects of bids with different countries have different effects. So here we look at whether the effects of bids termination on FDI inflows from developed and developing countries differ. And as for next 3 hypotheses, I would like to ask you to remember the table I showed you a few slides ago. So, as Mauritius is the country with which had bid, and it's a dominant investor, like for India, which has bid, we looked whether the termination of the India-Mauritius bid plays a dominant role in our estimates. And like the commentant, like part of the hypothesis, that the effect of the termination of other bids is negligible. The first hypothesis is like pretty the same, but from the other angle. The termination of the India-Mauritius bid resulted in a significant decrease in FDI to India from Mauritius. And the fifth one, like I'm sorry. Another dominant investor to India is Singapore, and we estimated whether the spillover effect was oh my god, I'm sorry. So Singapore is another dominant investor to India. So when for example, India-Mauritius bid was terminated, it can be possible that for investors it will become more interesting, more effective to invest not from Mauritius, I mean, as it both offshore territories, not from Mauritius, but from Singapore. And we tried to we looked at this point, like after the India-Mauritius bid was terminated, there was spillover effect for FDI from Singapore. I mean, which like whether it was an increase of foreign direct investment in Singapore. So these are our 5 hypotheses, which we estimated in our study. So now we, as I said, we use 2 methods. The first one is difference in difference. The second is synthetic control method. As for difference in difference, it's like has been widely used in estimation of the causal effects of reforms since the study of Ashenfelter and Katt in 1985. These methods helps us to estimate policy changes and exclude the impact of other temporary shocks. To do that, 2 time periods are considered before and after the reform. Like in our case, the reform is a termination. So the sample includes 2 groups of countries: the treated and control group. And difference in difference method has some kind of parallel trade assumption. It means it assumes that the control group and the treatment group would have developed in the same way in case there was no reform. In our case, it's if there was no any bits termination. So although DD usually used for ex post evaluation of the results of internal reforms, just like to usually it's because of parallel threat assumption, but we have a lot of examples of using DD in evaluation of international events consequences, some like signing or joining international agreements, like Kyiv in 2016 or the Soros in 2019. My gosh, yeah. Another method is synthetic control method. It's some kind of continuation of the DD method. It's actually one of the attitudes to evaluate the causal effects of reforms. It was developed by Abedi and Gardizabal and Abedi Diamond and Heimüller in 2003 and 2007, respectively. So we evaluate the effect by these methods. We evaluate the effect in a way which was proposed by Galliani. But one more point: what's the feature of this method? This method helps us to evaluate the impact if in the control group is only one object. In our case, is only one country. So we evaluate the effects in this way. We exclude from the model the country that was affected. I mean, the real country which was in a treated group. Then we calculate some kind of synthetic effects for countries from the control group. So the model is applied to each of the countries in the control group. Like, let's imagine that these countries were affected, that like bits termination also was with these countries. And then we compare the effects for the affected country, the real affected country, with the synthetic effects. If there are differences, we can say that really this reform, or like in our case, bits termination, had a significant effect on FDI. If there is no differences, so we do not have reasons to say that the reform or termination of bits has some kind of significant effects for country. So usually another thing that why we use synthetic control method, we can estimate effects of time varying treatment. Although most of the bits were terminated in March 2017, a lot of them were, not a lot, but a few of them were terminated before the March or after the March, I mean, in other quarters of calendar years. So in this way, we generate an appropriate set of synthetic effects. So like the model estimate the treatment period for the control group. It varies depending on the treatment period T for each exposed country. I mean that when you, for example, evaluate the impact of bits termination with, let it be Netherlands, which was in the fourth quarter of 2016, if I'm not mistaken, the control group will also be evaluated as it had termination in this fourth quarter of 2016, and the average effect will represent the impact. Yep. So of course there can be some kind of estimation problems during our study. Here you can see the list. The first one is a self-selection problem. It implies that economic agents may decide to participate in the program to get some kind of gain than others. But like in our case, it's actually not the problem. It's quite hard to imagine that countries will look for termination of agreement because there is no gain of that. But actually we use panel data, like we use DD on panel data with fixed effects, and it allows us to adjust the self-selection problems. Another part is parallel trend assumption. As I already said, what is it? We test this parallel trend assumption on data for the period before the mass bits termination. I like to understand whether it proved. So an important assumption is the stationarity of the dependent variable. We use methods described in Levin-Lin 2, Hryhorii and Brighton to test the stationarity of log form of FDI inflows. And since we use quarterly data for several periods, we expect some kind of autocorrelation of errors, and we also have conducted estimates of each of the models adjusted for autocorrelation. Also we include fixed time effects in the model and another dummy variable responsive for first, second, and the third quarter to account the seasonality. And to check the robustness of the estimates, we conducted a placebo test to confirm the robustness, as I already said, for the robustness of the estimates. It implies that we analyze the hypothetical bits termination, which occurred earlier than in reality, and we estimated the impact at the moment when no reform has taken place. So, and as it obviously, if the placebo test shows a significant effect, the robustness is questionable because if the same effects can be found before the actual termination, how we can make other conclusions of general model. So here's a model description. So as I said, we use the log form of foreign direct investment. We use foreign direct investment equity inflows to India. It is a dependent variable. This indicate, FDI equity inflows does not include reinvested earnings of companies and investment which go to the other capital category provided by Indian authorities. So we think that this allows us to estimate the impact of bits termination more accurately, because it means that we estimate only the new foreign direct investment from the countries without any reinvestments and so on and so forth. We do not use adjustment for example, by GDP deflator or other alternative indicators, because our model, panel based on panel data with fixed effects, assumes that specific quarterly dummy includes price or exchange rate fluctuations or GDP fluctuations.
Can I just ask one question here?
Yeah, I think yes.
So I is an index for a country that India has a treaty with, is that right?
Yeah. Okay. I is a country, T is a period. The professor, it was the only question, or I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, I it's for country, T is for period. I'm sorry not to mention it. So as for variables, the terminated variable all of these variables are dummies. So the terminated variable takes the values 0 for the control group and 1 for the treated group. So that's how we understand which country is in which group. The after respects to the bit status. Is it in force or is it terminated during the period, for example, the second quarter of 2017. So in our DD model, it is 0 for the first 8 quarters and 1 afterwards in the DD model. Yep. And after multiplied terminated, yeah, it's It presents the countries from the treated group in periods after termination. That's why delta is the coefficient of interest, our coefficient of interest that respects to the relative changes in the FDI inflows due to because of the BID's termination. As already said, we had quarter-specific effects and dummy variables Q1, Q2, and Q3. They take the value 1 at the first, second, and third quarters, respectively. So you can see the model on the slide. So delta is, as I already said, the coefficient of interest, alpha is the intercept, beta reflects which group a country belongs to, gamma show FDI's changes after March 2017. Phi is the quarter-specific effect, mu eta it's unobservable individual heterogeneity, and epsilon is the error. If there is no questions, we can move, on the model, we can move on. Okay, great. So, as you can see, most of our variables are dummies, so that's why we do not have a lot of sources. So the main indicator we use is the FDI equity inflows. The source is the Department of Industry Development and Internal Trade of India. It provides the quarterly data of FDI. Another needed indicator is status of the bids. Is it enforced or is it enacted? We do that based on UNCTAD Investment Policy Hub, which has information of dates of enforcing, dates of signing, enacting, and actually termination of the bids. And of course, to understand whether it was some kind of different effects for FDI from developed to developing countries, we had to understand which countries are developed and developing, and for that we used United Nations classification from 2019. Our period under review is from the second quarter of 2015 to second quarter 2019, so it's 4 financial years plus 1 quarter. And number of countries in the DD, it's 18 countries we have in treated group and 14 countries in control group. As for developed and developing countries, we have in both categories 16 countries. I think I think I said everything I needed. Actually, one more note: when we use SCM with time varying effect, we add 8 more countries to the treated group because the bids with them were terminated not in the first quarter of 2017. So here are the results. These 3 columns present results of testing our first hypothesis about whether bids termination led to the decrease of FDI inflows. So as we can see, the first and the second columns indicate a decrease in India's FDI inflows. If we transform these numbers, so we can say that it's about 44.2% decrease quarterly on average. As we can compare with, for example, in the first one model, we do not have quarter-specific effects, but we have it in the second. We see that the results do not change, but R squared has improved and actually slightly improved the standard errors. So, as I said, one of the estimation problems could be autocorrelation of errors. So that's why we estimate the model with an autocorrelation correction. The results, as you can see in the third column, the autocorrelation coefficient with correction is much lower than without it. Here you can see it. And like this indicates that there is a autocorrelation, and that's why we adjusted for autocorrelation all our other models, and like to interpret the first hypothesis, we use the third column. So we do not reject, like looking at this slide, we do not reject our primary hypothesis about the negative impact of bit termination on FDI inflows. Yep. Here you can see the fourth and fifth column present the results for testing the second hypothesis, while the sixth and the seventh is for hypothesis 3. So as you can see that column 5, let's start from the column 5, that there is no significant effect on FDI from developing countries, while we can see that if we look into FDI from developed countries, we have significant effect, like 1% significance level. And actually it's about, if we transform the numbers, it's about 50% and a half per quarter decrease in FDI inflows from developed countries. So what we can say, like conclude after that maybe for investors from developing countries, BEAT is not a key factor, like when they made their investment decisions. So, but for developed countries, for investors, I mean, from developed countries, it is essential to have certain guarantees that which can be provided by the BEAT that they will not lose the investment. So in the sixth and the seventh column, you can see the estimate the results for models without Mauritius and Singapore. So I mean that this sample does not include these two countries. The sixth is for a full sample, and the seventh only for developing countries. And as you can see, the exclusion of these two countries does not affect the whole conclusion that from the sixth column we can see that there is a significant negative effect, while in the seventh there is no impact at all. I mean, there is no significant impact at all. Yeah, and the last one, I mean, the last one of DD results. It's all three columns show the results of the placebo test. We do that, we place the conditional bit termination at the beginning of 2016, I mean a few quarters before. And as you can see, we do not see any significant effect on any significance level. So thus we can conclude that March 2017, our first quarter of 2017, is not a random date, but some kind of turning point that affected foreign companies' decisions in the countries with which India terminated bids. That's all for DD results. Now we move to results of synthetic control method. So its results quite different from the way we interpret the results. It's quite different from DD. So in a synthetic control method, the estimates are computed for each quarter after termination and show a change in log FDI per period. So here we can say that the effect demonstrates the difference between the actual and some kind of synthetic log FDI in each period. Column 1 in table 4 is, I'm sorry, there is no table 4. I mean, in table from the left side, show the result for testing hypothesis H4, I mean the first one, and the second column for the fifth hypothesis. The third column shows the results of evaluating the impact of BITS termination with varying termination periods. It's when I called that we added 8 countries to the treated group. And actually we can, in this way, we can compare it with the results of DD results on the first hypothesis, on the central hypothesis. So the results in column 1 demonstrate that we cannot confirm the first hypothesis. The bits termination with Mauritius did not significantly affect FDN flows. Actually, we can see that there is some kind of big significant growth in the second quarter, in the second period. And it's out of logic, actually. And then we can see that almost the same amount, almost the same change is in the fifth period. Yeah, so that's why we cannot confirm the first hypothesis. And the same thing, I mean that I will remind you what the first hypothesis is that the termination of bid between India and Mauritius negatively impact FDI inflows from Mauritius after the March 2017. As for the fifth hypothesis, which tells us that there was a spillover effect because of actually Mauritius termination, a bit with Mauritius termination, we cannot see this here any significant values, so we also do not confirm this hypothesis. So we can say that there wasn't any spillover effect for Singapore. And when we include additional 8 countries, which with bids were terminated not in the March 2017, we actually can confirm our previous conclusions of the H1. We can see that from the 3rd and the 6th to 6th period, there are quite big negative impact on FDI inflows from the countries. Actually, if you look at the picture from the right side, it's about the fourth hypothesis. The black line, it's how we it's estimated effects for Mauritius and other countries. Here's some kind of mistake, not as developing, just other countries without it's developing and develop. And we can see that effects from Mauritius does not differ from other countries. So it's also proves our conclusion about no effect of termination of bid between Mauritius and India. So here's the conclusions. So mass unilateral bids termination is quite a phenomenon in modern world practice, and our study is devoted to it. The use of DD and SCM confirm our central hypothesis that bids termination has significant negative impact on FDI inflows. It's about 46.1% per quarter on average. Then we also, our results show that bids termination effects differ between FDI from developed and developing countries. So for developed countries, bids termination led to decrease in FDI, to India, by half. And actually, we do not support the assumption that the bid termination with Mauritius may have skewed the estimates. It's hypothesis 3, and at the same time, we couldn't confirm the hypothesis about a significant decrease in FDI from Mauritius to India and some kind of spillover effect for FDI from Singapore. That's all our conclusions. And as I said, I would like to finish by some question, to start the discussion. So we see that negative impacts of bids termination it indicates the feasibility of quick BITs renegotiation by India. But, and actually we know that state authorities are carrying them out, yeah, these negotiations. But we need to understand that two dominant investors to India are Mauritius and Singapore. For the first one, we saw that termination of the bid hasn't affected the foreign direct investment from this country. The second dominant investor is Singapore. It's actually has never had this bid with India. So actually this call into the question, the urgency of this renegotiating. My possible answer for this question, explanation why India need to renegotiate and enact bids, it's not from the point of FDI inflows, but from the point of FDI outflows. So Indian companies are active international investors, and actually the renegotiation of the bids should also be considered as a tool to ensure India's FDI outflows. But of course, this question deserves a quite separate empirical research. That's all. I'm saying thank you for your attention, and I am ready to answer your questions, comments, advices, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, could you just show the second
slide?
Yeah, the second slide. Just the
The
last.
second slide.
And the second last slide.
This one or this one?
The one just before this.
Yeah.
So this period here refers to the quarter, right?
Period. I'm sorry. What?
In the table that you have.
Yeah, it's the sequential number of the quarter, because it differs. For example, why we have only 6 periods in the third columns, because some of the BITs were terminated. We can count in the third or fourth quarter of 2017. And that's why, but the model evaluates the average impact based on all estimates. So it doesn't show estimate for 7th, 8th, and 9th period.
Right.
So for Mauritius and Singapore, it's still the first period is the second quarter of 2017. I mean, for the columns 1 and 2 until the second quarter in 2019. But in the third column, this is the features of the model. We see the importance of to add some countries to it's another way to confirm our central hypothesis.
Right. Okay. So this is basically saying then, I'm just restating what you said. This is just saying that in the second quarter, you actually see an increase in FDI from Mauritius. Is that the right way to interpret that?
Elena, I didn't actually catch the idea. Maybe you can.
Yes, thank you for the comment. We see two opposite effects that are significant. At the second quarter after termination BITs, we see that the effect is positive, and at the fifth, it is negative and quite big in the number. Yes, it's quite problematic to interpret. What I suggest that here we might have some maybe this resulted from plans before BIT was terminated, and that's why we have some short-term increase in Mauritius, in the inflows of FDI from Mauritius at the second quarter, as just execution of agreements that were made before the termination. That's my guess.
Yeah, but to interpret Professor Kake, that's why we actually added the picture from the right on the right hand, it's actually is about Mauritius. What's the effect for termination of bid with Mauritius? As we can see, it is not differ at all from the dynamics for other countries. Usually, when we if we look at other studies using SCM, like this black line used to might be something like here. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, maybe I just so and here it's quite between other countries changes. So it's here why we can use the graph to interpret that it's actually like that we cannot confirm that there was any effect because it doesn't differ from other countries in our sample.
Okay, thanks. So we have about 10 minutes or so for questions in case anyone has anything they want to ask.
Gregory, I was just wondering whether the termination of bids was combined with some other policy measures, especially in case of countries such as Mauritius or Singapore, like in improving ease of doing business or double taxation avoidance act. Maybe you might already have addressed it, but
yeah, I understand. It's quite interesting thing. You mean that some kind of changes in the policy, for example, with Singapore, I mean, between India and Singapore, between India and Mauritius, can, how to say, could affect the our estimates. I would say I didn't find any confirmation of such changes. I mean, for example, for Mauritius and Singapore, of course, there were some changes of inward of inner policy of India. You can, I'm sure you know about, for example, inflation targeting, about tax I don't remember how it's in English, but like the same tax policy for all states of India. I'm sorry, I don't remember the
GST.
Yeah,
that's GST.
So, but if we look at this, at these measures, we understand that it affects other. I mean, different. I mean, the leveling of tax levels in different states can affect investment, of course, but it affects investment from all countries. Doesn't matter is it from US, United States, Ukraine, Russia, or Mauritius. So, but as for additional measures, I mean, between countries, I didn't find anything of that. So we looked at it, of course, but didn't find. Yep. Thank you. I hope I answered your question.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
may I make a comment to the previous question about two significant effects on Mauritius? I forgot to mention that using synthetic control methods, we are not able to include period fixed effects, which were actually included in difference in difference. So that's why here these period fixed effects are not smoothed, and some of them are significant. Whereas in the difference in difference, we even do not look at them, although they are actually possible that some of the period fixed effects are significant. But we estimate the average effect. And here we have estimated the average effect, but the results provide us with specific quarter results.
I see. And another comment that, again, you might have addressed, but maybe I missed out on it. And I think Professor Chetan Khate asked a question regarding that as well. So I was just wondering, the coefficient on after was positive, but the interaction of after with bits termination was negative. So I'm just wondering whether it is the case that now countries which were earlier routing investments through countries with BITS agreement companies which were routing investments through BIT countries are now no longer routing those, and maybe that could account for that positive on after is.
Your mic is, I don't know, Mr. Chaturvedi, we don't hear you. Last few words at least I didn't hear.
Okay, I'm just wondering whether countries which were routing investment through BITS countries, which had agreement with India, they are no longer routing those investments through them and now investing directly through their own countries. And could that explain the positive coefficient on after?
I'll try to answer about the positive coefficient in after, and Professor Kotyrlo will like correct me if needed. So you see the variable after is positive because it estimates the dynamics, the changes of FDI inflows from all countries, from countries of control group and from countries from treated group. So that's why it's positive. As we can see that, like, we can conclude that foreign direct investment from countries in the control group increased a lot, while FDI from treated group decreased. So it's the positive coefficient is caused by, because if we look this coefficient look at all countries, not only a treated or control group. Was I right, Professor Kotyrlo?
Yes, you're right. If I may, I would like to add. So what a double difference approach allow us to see that there was a dynamic which was common for both groups, and this dynamic is positive. And this is shown in the after coefficient. But for the group that was with terminated VITs, we see that together with overall positive dynamics, they have experienced the decrease, which was quite dramatic, because of the VIT's termination. So in total, we might guess that the final result for the countries that actually terminated VITs with India, the total effect was 0 from common dynamics and from the dynamics caused by VITs termination. Whereas countries that didn't have VITs and they were in the control group, they only experienced positive dynamics after the second quarter of 2017.
So have we? I hope we answered your question. Yeah, Mr. Gay.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Why don't you consider FDI in debt? Why is it just equity?
Actually, like when I started this study, it was a few years ago when I was a master student. Maybe it's just like Department of Internal Trade. I forgot the name of department. I'm sorry. So it has quite disaggregated data. I mean, disaggregated on country level data for FDI equity inflows. And for us, it was it was started then. And I actually, to be honest, I have never thought about to look into that. And actually, if I get your point right, why we didn't look at foreign direct investment in debt? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and actually, I'm not sure. I read some bilateral investment treaties. Actually, they are quite the same of India. I'm not sure that these foreign direct investment are under protection by bilateral investment treaty.
Mhm.
So something like that. And if we want to look into the effect of BIT's termination, we have to look at the FDI which are under BAT's protection. So maybe you have some ideas,
Yeah,
maybe you
but
have some
the
propositions.
BIT
We will be glad to hear them.
No, I mean the BIT could also be applying to FDI and debt or greenfield investments. I mean, it could be much more broader than just equity, right?
I think so. If you know, for example, where we can find this data, we will be quite grateful for that. I mean, I didn't find this, for example, in the DIP, I mean, Department of Internal Trade.
Mhm.
So if you have, please contact us. I mean, if you have information, because of course, Indian citizens, I think, are more familiar with Indian sources and sites and so on and so forth.
Right. I mean, the one think tank in India that I don't work on FDI actually, but the one think tank in India that does do a lot of work is called ICRIER, ICRIER. So you should maybe Google them and Google their working paper series. They do a lot of work on FDI, and maybe of interest to you.
Okay, it would be great if you write it in chat. For example.
Yeah. I'll chat with you after the seminar is over, and I can talk to you more.
Yeah, thank you.
So any further questions? We can take maybe one or two. We have a couple of minutes. So I guess can I just ask one quick question about this table that's right up here? This includes country fixed effects, right?
This table quarter specific effects.
But there are no country specific fixed effects.
No, fixed effects. No, it's with fixed. It's panel data with fixed effects. Yeah, DD results are with fixed effects.
Okay.
But we cannot use quarter specific effects in the columns from the 3rd until 10th because we use correction for autocorrelation, and the instruments which we used to do that in Stata does not allow to use quarter specific effects. But country fixed effects are of course in the model.
Okay, thanks. So any further questions? And if there are not any, we can conclude the seminar. Yes. So thanks for a very interesting talk, and thank you for the participants who also made this very lively.